Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. We begin first with a satellite view of yesterday from GOES 16, and you can see the leading edge of that cold front working its way through the southeast, where we did get some stronger storms yesterday. Behind it, quite a bit of clearing here with higher pressure coming in and some colder temperatures. But as I was kind of walking through this animation, just looking at this system as it moves through, my attention was drawn to parts of the MidSouth, and I'll show you why here, because when you just watch yesterday a little bit closer here in the southern plains and parts of the Mid-South, we once again see some of the fires that are in parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri. Except earlier in the week when the smoke was blowing to the north as this system was approaching, behind the cold front we now have those northerly winds, and you can see the smoke plumes being blown toward the south here. Now that cold front's pretty strong. You can see that the temperatures behind the cold front, which have already made it clear down here to the Gulf, are anywhere between 15 and 30 degrees colder than the same time yesterday. That's what this map shows us here. And the National Weather Service throughout this week has slowly been extending where it has the greatest risk of frost and freeze. And it's going to get pretty far to the south. I'll show you the temperatures in just a moment. But what you've got here is widespread freeze warnings through the Ohio Valley, back through the Mid-South, getting all the way down to the southeastern parts of the Carolinas. This is a pretty late frost freeze event getting this far to the south. Meanwhile, on the back side of it, this is all red flag warning. And I think what we should do is take a quick look at the wind speeds we're expecting here. So the front advance in the overnight hours, you can now see it by 7 a.m. this morning. Here's the position of that front. What we're going to notice is that throughout the day today, we're still going to endure kind of a stronger, 10 to 20 mile an hour northwest wind across the southeast and up the east coast here. But notice the stronger winds coming out of the south. This signals two things. This is the warm-up that's going to happen behind this big cold front here. And also you can see that given the drier conditions and those stronger winds, it's going to be that risk for the fire. Now, as we go into the overnight hours on Thursday and then into early Friday morning, let's just stop it, right here at 6 a.m. The high-pressure cell is sitting over Illinois and Indiana, and this is what's going to be critical to getting the temperatures to drop down here, below that freezing mark. Very light winds overnight. The skies will be cleared out. Therefore, we're not going to have strong mixing in the lower levels of the atmosphere with these weak winds, and that's going to give us a setup here for rapid radiational cooling of the Earth's surface. And therefore, we expect that cold air to get pretty far to the south there. Let's take a look at just how far by going to our minimum temperatures forecast. This is Thursday morning. There we go. There's Friday. I put a contour line, it's in white, of where the National Digital Forecast Database has temperatures below freezing. And so you can see how far into the mid-Atlantic and into the southeast we're expecting to get those overnight temperatures. Again, this is Friday morning where we're below freezing. But the immediate warm-up is in place here. And as I just keep playing this, we'll just do it quickly here. You can see how quickly by Easter Sunday getting into early next week, the warmth does return. I'd like to show you what those max temperatures look like as well. So here's Thursday's max temperatures. Let's get into Friday, a very chilly day here from Texas all the way to Maine, while the warmth really rebuilds quickly here in the northern plains and in California. By the way, quick note on California. Had an interesting phone call with prune growers here in the Sacramento Valley. And unfortunately, at the very end of the bloom here, the flowering, getting these temperatures up over 80 degrees could be detrimental to that crop. And so when you look at this, like, okay, widespread warmth in spring, there are a lot of crops that are in California which are very dependent on chill hours. And when they do go into this time period, it's important to understand what the pollinators are doing, like the bees, and how the temperatures and winds are impacting that, because it was a very windy week here, and now we've got very warm temperatures in that area. But as we cross over the mountains and get back to the central U.S., this is Saturday's high temperatures compared to normal. And then Sunday, it's amazing to see this, right? We could be in the 80s here, warmer than the Gulf Coast. So spring breakers, head to South Dakota this year. And as we go forward from there, there's Monday and into next week, Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, thinking about this, let's take a look at how the pattern goes out to day 10. So the GFS and the European are very keyed in on this pattern, which is going to favor more troughing, therefore cooler air from Alaska into the Gulf of Alaska, and just broad-scale warmth to the east, as you see here. So thinking about that, I'm working on a new suite of maps here, forecasting GDUs. Now, this is using just raw GFS data, just so that you know. But the map you're looking at here is through the next 10 days, how many GDUs we're expected to accumulate. Now, it is very early April here, and therefore, as we work our way through April, many folks that are, in this area, let's just kind of highlight it like this. Remember that throughout April, we still have risk for frost as we go forward. So this heat that you're seeing here, putting all these, upwards of 100 to 120 GDUs in the plains here, and even in the eastern Corn Belt, 50 to 60, that signals we're going to have these warmer temperatures in place. But a big question I'm going to try to answer in a moment here is how long does that last, okay? From there, getting out into day 10 through 15, this was the GFS's latest look at the 0Z. And some of the more important things that we've seen transition is a trend towards some cooler weather here. We still see more broad-scale warmth across the Canadian prairie, northern plains, but this trend that occurred in the 0Z runs last night was also echoed in the European model. Now, I'd like to just kind of take a look at why we're going to get to that point. And where I've got this animation paused here is all the way out to day 10. So what I'm concerned about at day 10 is we start to see some ridging happening somewhere here between the Hudson Bay and Greenland. And can you just kind of get a sense that there's broad-scale troughing kind of all around that? See the blues surrounding it here. Now, how we got there, if we just step this back, let's just kind of watch the pattern. So here's the trough exiting, that's the cooler air, and then the ridge that builds in behind it for this weekend and early next week, that's the warmth that comes in. We then have this kind of long, elongated trough feature here, and a big ridge sitting in the Gulf of Alaska over toward the tip of the Aleutian Islands. But it's this, downstream ridge I'm going to watch carefully, because what happens is it builds in place, and we just start to see around it troughing that happens. And my concern is this warmth we got forecast through the first 2 weeks of April, or at least 10 days of April, may not be as long-lived as we would hope it to be. And that would just simply be because, again, we're out here about day 13, we just noticed that around that ridge there is a general troughing pattern. And what that could signal is a cool down in the temperatures across the U.S. And I'll talk about that and put it into context of what's going on in the tropics in just a few moments. But I want to talk near-term precip, because our last week has been extremely wet, as we know, into parts of the Tennessee Valley, parts of the southeast, and the mid-south here. And you're looking again at the last 7 days of total accumulated precip. Thinking about that, this is also the severe weather totals we've now added up here, and we're looking specifically at tornadoes. So after a very slow start to the year, what happened in March is we jumped right back up here to sit on our climatological average. And we know that we're going into what we call the busy season with tornadoes. So you see right into this area, rapid accumulation historically of a lot of tornado count. So we need to look out here into what April is going to give us. But some more precip stats here, because March now being done, we can look back on what it gave us. I love these maps from Iowa State showing us the total precipitation ranks by climate district. And I want to draw your attention to a few things. Again, if you are north of that line there, in the Northeast, these are areas that were quite dry. Same thing for parts of Michigan as well. This was well forecast by the models. This wetter pattern here was very well forecast in advance. This was not. And I'd like to show you what I mean here. If we just rewind the clock back to the European weeklies, and we know that the European weeklies tend to be the best performing, statistically, long-range forecast. Going back to when this model was run on March the 1st, looking out over the month of March, the model had keyed in on this wetter pattern, especially early in the month. But not here. All right. Yeah, did it get the drier pattern elsewhere? You could say it did. But that one big event we had back in March, that's the kind of thing that sub-seasonal models cannot. They just can't find that. And those one-off events are often the things that really drive a season. We need to keep that in mind as we move forward throughout this forecast for spring and summer. California, just want to check in because I know I have a lot of viewers from California. Looking at your reservoir conditions, pause the video. Take a look at your nearest reservoir here. But overall, given that this winter saw about 2/3 of normal precipitation, we can see the reservoir levels are down. And checking in here on the Northern Sierra precipitation stations, okay, we can see that we're currently sitting about 22.4 inches. Normal, if you just kind of come up here, would have been closer to about 43 to 45. From there, let's just slide south into the San Joaquin, 17.7. Normal would be up here about double that, so about around 34 or 35. In the Tulare Basin down south, we can see we're sitting at 9.4 inches of accumulation, and we should be sitting somewhere up here around 25. So this was certainly a year that we had no miracle March. We certainly didn't have the moisture return because of the split flow. And I just wanted to keep those folks in California up to date on what we're seeing in terms of precip. Okay, moving forward with this forecast. The feature we got to watch now is actually sitting right here. And it's going to take a long time for this to then eventually cut into the United States. Because with the ridge that's out ahead of this is what's bringing in the warmth. This is what's also going to be bringing in the drier conditions overall. You see, if we look out there from the European model into week 1, folks that are down here should be very happy with this forecast. It's drier than normal. We do see wetter conditions that have spread in through here, but I want to talk to you about some model differences there. And unfortunately, with the weaker flow we still see in the west, getting into the first full week of April, it is not showing up to be above average in terms of precipitation there. GFS. So you saw the European. Here's the GFS. Very similar forecasts where we just talked about here and along the west coast. But you see how the GFS has wetter conditions farther to the north? I want to show you why that's the look. It all has to do with where this wave right here eventually ends up in the United States. So let's go take a look at it by going first to the European model. Now we can play through this pretty quickly today. You notice here that in the Northeast, one of the things that the models just overdid, and we were concerned about that, was the snow on the back side here, right? We thought there'd be quite a bit more from Ohio through Pennsylvania into New York, and now we can see that the models have backed off on that. And we mentioned on Monday how challenging April snow is to forecast here. High pressure builds in though. You can see it here through the Friday, getting into Saturday and Sunday. And then what we're going to watch early next week, so this is now to Sunday 7 p.m., is this system. This is the one that was sitting up over there over Alaska. So this is Monday morning, working our way into Tuesday morning. We do have a little, it's almost like a little, you call it a clipper, but it's on the nose here of a front that's going to pass through parts of Iowa, Wisconsin, and Michigan that could be bringing in some light precipitation. But here we are next Tuesday morning, getting into Tuesday evening. Now we get out here to Wednesday morning, afternoon, and evening. And what you saw is that the European model dips that wave down and starts to curl it up into the low that you see sitting right here over parts of Arkansas and Missouri by the time we get out to next Wednesday. Question is, does the other model, the GFS, agree with this? And what I want to show you is it doesn't. It takes it and brings it much farther to the north. So the difference is the European drops it much farther to the south. And the spread here is the full width of, or the north-south width of Iowa and Missouri. But both of them do bring a system in by the time we get out to next, Tuesday, Wednesday time frame. But there's discrepancy on the location of where that system's going to be, all right? But as they pull it through, it eventually heads toward the Great Lakes, and it's going to kind of close up some of the early planting windows that some folks might be taking advantage of here, given the very warm conditions. Now, from that point forward, all right, what I'd like to do is I want to go back to this idea of this ridge that's sitting in place right here and what it might do to the flow as we just see that block setting up. So into week 2, what we see, if we just kind of come back here, is you can see this trough that's sitting here and one that's off the west coast. The one that's off the west coast is too far west to really bring in lots of precipitation to California, which they would still want in the month of April. So as a result, from the GFS ensemble, the wetter conditions are here and they head up toward British Columbia, all right? Slight wet anomaly in the Klamath Mountains and also down here in the Sierra Nevada. But where the second trough extends into this area, we see wetter conditions going into week 2, all right? I would extend this to include more of this area, more of that area showing up with more active weather systems into week 2. The European model, it's got it a little bit farther to the south on the wetter weather north. We have better precipitation coming through parts of the Canadian Prairie into the northern plains. This isn't drought busting, but at least it's not overly dry. But again, we see that same pattern setting up here from the Mid-South over to the Mid-Atlantic. And again, I just want to illustrate that this area, whoops, sorry about that. This area in through here, I think a lot of this is still forecast a bit too dry. I think mid-April is going to have a more active pattern. Now, some reasoning as we start to wrap this up. Longer term, getting out there to the third week in the forecast. So this gets us from April 14th through the 21st. There's a couple of things I'm taking note of here. A trend in the longer range models has been to expand some of the cooler air that could be coming out of the northern plains and bringing a few more shots of this across the Midwest. Does the south stay warm? Does the east stay warm? We've seen a pretty good signal for that. But I think there's some concern that even though we're going to have this warm go of it after this weekend, that it's not going to be permanent or sticking around. And there are still some cold shots coming through. And unfortunately, those cold shots this time of year do bring in frost risk into this area. So I know there might be a tendency to really go aggressively after planting. I'm just concerned about some frost risk as we get into middle and end of April. From there, just to take a look at where this pattern goes, I just want to show you the animation. You do notice, though, that by the time we get to the end of April and then into early May, the models still want to bring back in the warmth and beat the cooler weather back farther to the north and west and really kind of minimize it here. But just thinking about that, let's also just take a quick look at precipitation. The models are now starting to come, I think, a little bit closer into alignment with our original ideas. When you get kind of east of that line, I think that going through April and into May, we will see more normal spring rains. The question is, will it be this wet into this area? We got to have strong subtropical jet stream flow like this. We need to have, flow coming out of the northwest like that to meet up with it to really give us this pattern. And I'm just saying, if we do end up putting a big blocking ridge here, we could get that as we get later into April. So what I want to focus on then is if we just look out here at some of the causes for this, we come back to some ideas we've been discussing. So the cooler water here, part of the negative Pacific meridional mode. This is not, this negative PMM is something we haven't experienced in a while at this point in March. You got to rewind the clock almost 9-10 years before the last time we saw an ocean temperature pattern like this. Our La Nina continues to fade. The Southern Oscillation Index is 0. It's got to be above 7. And even though you see some cooler water that just emerged here, that was the end of it. So don't think that we have a resurging La Nina. Meanwhile, the warmth in the North Atlantic, which is a part of the Atlantic meridional mode, shows us that the warmth that we see in this area is also going to be a major factor moving forward. And we've been discussing this for quite some time. Now, thinking about all of that, I want to just show you some stuff. I was having a great discussion with a fellow meteorologist. His name's Jonathan Marker, and we were talking about that ridge that was setting up right in this area. And what we notice is that April's, where we have, we're looking at the Pacific meridional pattern, tend to favor more ridging in that area. And as a result, you do get some troughing that just kind of surrounds it. See that? So it appears right now that the atmospheric flow pattern is mimicking very much what a negative PMM scenario would give us. And that's why I just have that later month concern about the cooler weather coming back. Not like 2018, but just some cooler weather coming back, okay? So just want to show you. Let's blow this up so it's maybe a little bit easier to see here. There we go. This is the correlation in April with the Pacific meridional mode. Now remember, we have a negative Pacific meridional mode right now. So therefore, when you see the cooler colors, this would actually represent wetter conditions in this area. Okay? That's why I'm convinced, that's why I'm trying to convince myself that I think we're going to see more active spring weather here, unlike what the longer range models would suggest. All right? We tend to be drier farther to the south. We also tend to be drier over much of the Pacific Northwest when the Pacific meridional mode tends to be the more dominant factor. So outside of that, with fading La Nina, we've talked about the North Atlantic. I think what I'll come back to at the end here is the MJO. So you know that with La Nina out, the MJO is now making more regular progression. And what I want you to see is it's going to go from phase 4 right now through phase 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now, why we talk about that is because let's go take a look at what each of these phases mean. We're going out of 5 into 6 pretty quickly here. And as we do that, historically at this time of year, that tends to favor the above average temperatures in this area. So that's the near term we've been talking about. But as you saw, let's go back to it again. We're eventually going to get over here into 7 and 8. Now what happens when you get into 7 and 8? Let's go take a quick look. I'm going to click on 8, scroll this up, and now let's put a mask over on this. So you notice we tend to get a slight cooler bias in through here. Well, you go back to some of the earlier forecasts that I showed you in this video for that week 2 time period, and we saw the cool down in the southeast up to the east coast. Let's see if I can find it for you real quick here. Nope. There, excuse me. So now that matches up well with phase 8 of the MJO. Okay, let's keep going with this idea. If the MJO comes back into null space and pops out over here, versus running all the way around down to phases 2 and 3. Well, if it goes over the Indian Ocean, let's go take a look at what happens in phase 3 in March and April and May. Yeah, you can see here that would signal much cooler weather. So what I'll be watching here is to know if the MJO, kind of comes around like this back into null, or does it stay out here and come around? Because if it does and gets over the Indian Ocean, that's just another signal that broad scale warmth in April will not stick around for the entirety of April. Okay, that was a lot today, but just want to give you my full perspective on this. But I'll stop it right there. I appreciate your attention. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you.